Hi, everyone. Today, I am going to talk about the fortune of Benvenuto da Imola's Libellus Augustalis, more specifically, the presence of sequels and continuations of this work. First of all, let me say something about Libellus Augustalis. Written in the last quarter of the 14th century, it is a short list of emperors' biographies. Starting with Caesar and Roman emperors, the list continues with the Byzantine emperors and those of the Holy Roman Empire. The last one is Wenceslas of Luxembourg, who reigned in the last years of Benvenuto's life. These biographies are very short. All the events or the personal traits of each emperor are summarized by the author in a few words and in short sentences. Let's have a look at Justinian's life. Without a critical text, I quote from the Editio Princeps made in Basile in 1496. Benvenuto does not provide a detailed biography, but he fixes the events in a basic form. And so in a few lines, we have the defeat of the Persian, the liberation of the Africa from Vandals, the massacre of the Goths, the defeat of King Totila, and the legislative reform. The Libellus was greatly appreciated by the next generation of writers, as proven by the high number of manuscripts in the most renowned European libraries. Some of these manuscripts present additional biographies of Wenceslas' successors after the Libellus. This is a very interesting phenomenon. That of updating Benvenuto's work became a custom among the 15th century writers. We have two different examples of these continuations. One is the so-called Continuatio ad Libellum Augustalem by Enea Silvio Piccolomini, Pope Pius II. The other is a group of sequels made by anonymous writers. Written between the 1457 and 1458, this integration consists of 4 biographies, corresponding to the first 4 Wenceslas successors, Robert of Bavaria, Sigismund of Luxembourg, and 2 members of the House of Habsburg, Albert II and Friedrich III. The importance of the Continuatio is due to Piccolomini's purpose to imitate Benvenuto, as we can read in the preface to the treatise De Europa. At the beginning, Piccolomini mentions the writing of the Continuatio in these terms: completi ad etatem nostram imperatorum numerum, brevitatem illius, of course Benvenuto, qui precesserat, imitatus. During my research, I have identified 7 manuscripts which contains Piccolomini's Continuatio. Today, I'm going to explain the particular feature of both the Libellus and the Continuatio in 3 of these manuscripts. The first is the Ottoboniano Latino 1863. This codex is made up of 8 quires. The second, the third, and the fourth were assembled by the humanist Giovanni Tortelli from Arezzo. The second quire contains the Libellus and the Continuatio. Thanks to the research of Paul Kunzel and Fabio della Schiava, this section can be dated between the 1462 and the 1464, so during the last years of Pius pontificate. So this is probably not only the oldest, but also the most authoritative witnesses of the Continuatio. We can also see the authority of this codex from another point of view. Before the Continuatio, there is a header that reveals the real author, Piccolomini, without mentioning the title. So Piccolomini's work here is transcribed as an autonomous work in comparison to the Libellus. About the title, we do not forget that the Continuatio ad Libellum Augustalem is only occasional. What we read is subsequentes quatuor imperatores reverendissimus pater et dominus Aeneas apposuit. Here we have some pieces from Piccolomini's Continuatio. It's clear from these examples that the Pope has made a sequel as faithful as possible to its prequel. Think about the biography on Justinian, and you will see the affinity with the Libellus in terms of concision and simplicity. In the other two manuscripts I've chosen for my analysis, we see another different feature. The Continuatio is copied after the Libellus, like in the previous case, but there is no distinction of title and author. The result is a union between the two works in only one. This new text is very different from codex to codex, and this difference depends on two different manners of union. Let's see them together. The first is that of the Rossiano Latino 373. This is a monographic codex written in the second quarter of the 15th century by Pietro Ippolito Lunense for the Marquis of Ferrara, Niccolò III d'Este. Pietro Lunense has copied the Libellus in a beautiful humanistic script, starting from the second paper of the codex and leaving the first blank. In another time, probably after the purchase of the manuscript by Cardinal Domenico Capranica, a second scribe has copied the Piccolomnis Continuatio in the first blank paper. The same copyist has also reported to the reader the presence of the new text, putting at the end of the Libellus the following advice: Hic debet sequire illud quod est scriptum in prima carta istius presentis libelli. So the copyist suggested to go back to the beginning of the book to continue reading. The second example is that of the Reginense Latino 678. It is a miscellaneous code written in the northern Italy in a littera rotunda of a single scribe and dated in the second half of the 15th century. Unlike the Rossiano, the Libellus and the Continuatio are united in only one catalogue of emperors, from Wenceslas up to Frederick III. In order to make this union, the copyist has modified the final biography of Wenceslas. Let's have a look to it. Wenceslas is the young sovereign emperor who wants to calm Italy, to surround the imperial crown. Benvenuto doesn't approve his intention unless the emperor is animated by a great virtue. The biography ends with an image of the Holy Roman Empire, who possessed nothing but a little portion of its territories in the West Europe. What we understand here is that Benvenuto has given a reasonable conclusion to its Libellus with an interlocutory message. In the Reginense Codex, the last period of the biography, from Sic Imperia to Occidentis, is missing. After, there is the Continuatio without the cuts, and the last biography ends with the missing period. With the addition of Piccolomnis Continuatio, it's natural that the interlocutory conclusion of the Libellus will no longer belong to the biography of Wenceslas. So the copyist has put it at the end of the new final biography, that of Frederick III. As I said at the beginning of my speech, Piccolomini was not the only to update Benvenuto's work with additional biographies. There are other sequels of the Libellus made by anonymous 15th century writers and users. In my research, I have identified 3 continuations based on the manuscripts they preserved them. The first is contained in 2 manuscripts of Venice and Ferrara. The second is located in Rome, and the last in 2 Ottoboniani manuscripts in Vatican City. The manuscripts Latino 1411 4320 from Venice, Biblioteca Marciana, is made up by 6 choirs, merged together after its entry in the monastery of San Giovanni di Verdara, near Padua. The third choir is written by a Gothic cursive script of the 14th century. It contains the Libellus without any changes or cuts, and then it follows a biography of Robert of Bavaria. Actually, this is not a biography, but a report on the election of Robert and his coronation as emperor. We read, in regem Romanorum ac imperatorem futurarum provinciarum ratificatus et confirmatus in 1403 Rome apud Sanctum Petrum calendis Octobris. For clear chronological reasons, the author of this voice cannot be Piccolomini. The date 1403 is a terminus post quem, but there is no mention of Robert's death. So we must suppose a terminus ante quem before the 1410, the year of the emperor's death. And Piccolomini was only 5 years old. Think about it. Surely this is the first attempt ever to increase the libellus with other biographies. The other manuscript is the class second 191 from Ferrara, Biblioteca Comunale Ariostea. Dated in the second half of the 15th century, it was written in a chancery writing of 3 different scribes. The Libellus is transcribed with the previous biography of Robert and a new biography of Sigismund. Another time, the author cannot be Piccolomini, and that is again for chronological reasons. I also believe that the author cannot be the same of the previous biography on Robert due to a chronological error. We read, Sigismundus electus fuit imperator anno domini 1000 et quadringenti, while from the previous biography, we know that Robert was confirmed emperor in 1403. I believe that this is an addition of the copyist of the Codex. First, he had the Robert's biography already included in the Venetian Codex, and then he mentioned the Sigismund as the current emperor. Looking for the second sequel, the manuscript 110 of the Bibliotheca Alessandrina in Rome is another miscellaneous codex written by a single German scribe. He signs himself as Fratrem Gaspar Stern de Nuremberg, and it is dated in the 1466. To the Libellus Augustalis are added only 2 biographies, Sigismund and Friedrich, the sovereigns who were able to boast the title of Rex Romanorum. This appointment was not given to Robert and Albert, elected, yes, by the council, but not designated by the Pope. Now I'm going to explain the main strategies with which the author headed his new text. The biography of Wenceslas is shorter, and the conclusion is replaced with a new section. All Benvenuto's considerations about the emperor are reworked in the past tense. If for Benvenuto the emperor wants to come in Italy, for Gaspar Stern, who writes a century later, Wenceslas never went to Italy. The biography of Sigismund shows that Gaspar has read the Libellus. The portrait of the emperor is characterized by adjectives and expressions taken directly from Benvenuto's work. Sigismund is multarum linguarum peritus, like Friedrich II of Swabia and Charles IV of Luxembourg. He is also a great expert of letters, magnae literature, like Antonius or Antoninus Pius. Sigismund is also largus et benignius et impauperis, like the emperors Tiberius II from Byzantium. Finally, it is also ab omnibus dilectus, like Henry VII of Luxembourg. Finally, the biography of Frederick III is actually that of Wenceslas, verbatim, with only the indication of the year of emperor's coronation. The 2 manuscripts of the last type, the Ottoboniani Latini 1477 and 2105, contain the same sequel. The choice of emperors is quite similar to Piccolomini's. Before the continuation, in both the manuscript, there is a signature, Actenus Benvenutus, that underlines the autonomy of the sequel in relation to the Libellus Augustalis. The biographies are characterized by the lack of information, especially on the duration of the reign. The subject of these biographies are summarized by the author with sentences like nil profecto actum est, nil memorato dignum confecit, or duo tantum laude et memoria digna fecit. But the most interesting trait of these biographies is the negative portrait of Friedrich III. The emperor here is greedy and lazy, is a freak of the fortune and nature, a dangerous person and an enemy for the others. Obviously, this portrait is something different to the idealization of Friedrich made by Piccolomini in his Historia Austrialis. The conclusion of the biography in some ways wants to emulate the interlocutory message of the Libellus. The biggest difference is that the anonymous author of this sequel suggests such a prophecy, marked by catastrophic tones. Moving to the conclusion, my review of the sequels of the Libellus Augustalis wanted to explain how the work was received in its afterlife. The presence of short biographies, simple sentences, and clear information has allowed to replicate the structure of the biographies of the Libellus, employing it to other historical figures. There is no doubt that Piccolomini's is the well-done result. The Pope has indeed to emulate this model, also doing a personal research on emperors' lives. None of the previous writers achieved the same result. There was who simply mentioned the presence of new emperors, like in the Venetian and Ferrara manuscripts, and who used Benvenuto's material, betraying a lack of historical research, like in the Roman Codex. The lack of historical research also characterizes the sequel of the Ottoboniani manuscripts, although at first sight it is similar to Piccolomini's Continuatio. These attempts finally end in a trivial repetition of something already written. Thank you for your attention.